Hello. I um, I'm back with some Hardy Boys. I know I haven't been uploading any videos for about a year, but anyway, I'd like to get back into the into reading the Hardy Boy books and also some other books that I picked out. So anyway, here's chapter 8 of the Hardy Boys, where I left off a year ago. The chapter is called "A Perilous Plunge." Looking for your buddy? Frank whirled to face the same steamship company guard who had spotted the sleuth hovering near the docks earlier. Yes, he's my brother. Have you seen him? Joe was supposed to wait for me. I kind of wondered about that, said the guard. First, he went all the way out to the edge of the pier and sat down, just looking. All at once, about 10 minutes ago, he comes running back here like crazy, jumped in the blue and white boat, and took off like a shot, straight out into the bay. Was Joe alone? Frank asked quickly. All by himself. He must have seen something suspicious, Frank decided. At that very moment, Joe Hardy was bending tensely over the steering wheel of the sleuth, which was cutting along at top speed. Her prow stuck far out of the water. Great waves of spray were thrown up on both sides. But Joe seemed unconscious of the tremendous speed of his craft. His eyes were fixed with determination upon a powerful motorboat, running several hundred yards straight in front of him. Two men were seated aboard, one at the wheel, the other looking back frequently as if nervous. 10 minutes before, as Joe had sat at the edge of the dock, legs dangling, he had noticed this same boat bobbing beside the big white hull of the Seabright. One man had already boarded the motorcraft, and a second was climbing toward it down the ladder of the passenger vessel. Suddenly, Joe had leaned forward with sharp interest. In the moonlight, he had seen the name on the prow of the motorboat. It was the Napoli, which belonged to Tony Preto's father. Joe had seen that neither of the pair in the boat was Mr. Preto or his son. Now Joe heard a loud, whining roar, as if the boat ahead picked up speed. Apparently, the men realized they were being followed. The Napoli was showing her power. Come on, girl, Joe urged his own trusty craft affectionately. He jammed the throttle wide open. The race was on. Skimming over the smooth surface, throwing showers of glistening white spray, neither craft could gain on the other. Let's see. Dark shapes of buoys marking the harbor channel shot by them. The wet black rocks at the harbor's entrance came nearer and nearer, with the water of the Atlantic Ocean lined with white crests of waves just outside. Squinting through the windshield, Joe considered his strategy. The fleeing boat was a swift one, but it would doubtless turn soon, and then, he knew, the lighter, easier to handle sleuth would have the edge. He would cut them off without trouble. To his amazement, however, the men held straight toward the mouth of the harbor. They know their boat is heavier, Joe reasoned. They're going out to sea, hoping I'll have to slow down or swamp among the swells. Already the big rocks were closing in on both sides. Ahead, the ocean waves broke with a resounding smash along the barrier. The Napoli veered crazily in and out among the closely placed harbor buoys. He doesn't know the channel, flashed across Joe's mind. He'll tear out the bottom on those submerged rocks. Frantically, the boy sounded 3 long warning blasts on his own horn. Too late! The other boat, trying to cut round the rocky point into the Atlantic, abruptly stopped short in the water, as though a brake had been applied. A harsh grinding noise reached Joe's ears. Immediately, the Napoli's hull settled stern first into the deep water. Approaching the spot, Joe slowed down the sleuth. But the 2 men had already jumped overboard, and after swimming a few strokes, splashed ashore and scrambled to the top of the breakwater. There, for a moment, they were silhouetted against the sky. a short, burly fellow, and a slender man almost a foot taller. That short one looks like the man who drove the limousine, Joe exclaimed, as both men quickly scampered off the embankment and disappeared. Carefully, Joe marked the position of the sunken boat. Then he turned the sleuth back toward the piers. As he pulled in, Frank hailed him in relief. "Say, what made you take off anyway?" "Plenty," Joe gasped. "Wait till you hear." The tide was coming in, and he scrambled onto the dock unaided. Breathlessly, Joe poured out the story of the chase. "And the short, burly man," he added, "was the driver of the limousine that almost ran us down." "Are you sure?" Frank asked. He looked back, and I saw his face in the moonlight. Joe said. "We must find Chief Colleague," Frank said. "Maybe his men can still catch them." Joe shook his head doubtfully. "Too easy for those fellows to lose themselves among the rocks along shore. They're free for the moment, but I know the spot where Tony's boat is." Just then, Chief Colleague walked onto the pier. The boys hurried over to him and described Joe's adventure. We'll salvage the Napoli first thing by daylight," the chief said. "How about coming along? Meet me at the police wharf." The boys agreed at once and volunteered to call Tony Preto and tell him what had happened. Then Joe returned the sleuth to her berth, while Frank drove the car there to meet him. Together, they put the new lock on their craft. In a short time, they were both in the convertible and heading homeward through the deserted streets. A few minutes later, they crawled wearily into bed. But in a few hours, the boys were up. Frank called Tony, who gasped in dismay. "The Napoli? That's a crime. Yes, I'll go with you to see it." The Hardys picked him up, and they rode to the police wharf. Chief Colleague was waiting for them. "Sorry about your boat, Tony. Those thieves are getting nervier by the minute." "What about the Purdy place?" Joe asked him eagerly. "Did your men find anything when they searched last night?" "Nothing," Chief Colleague replied wryly. "No thieves, no cars, no loot." Just then, a police boat, equipped with a winch and a cable for minor salvage operations, came alongside the pier. The three boys and Colleague clambered in, and the vessel headed for the mouth of the harbor. Frank said, once more picking up the thread of the case. "Do you suppose Tony's boat was stolen by the same men who were seen in our boat earlier last night?" "It wouldn't surprise me," Chief Colleague answered. "Anyhow," Joe spoke up, "we're pretty sure the short fellow in Tony's boat was the man who drove the limousine and one of the harbor thieves. Sure like to know where he and his pal are hiding out." By now, the police boat had reached the mouth of the harbor. The officer at the wheel eyed the nearby shore warily. "You're lucky you didn't stave your own boat in," he told Joe. "The underwater rocks are really treacherous along here." "Don't I know it," Joe agreed. The officer throttled down and slowly approached the place that Joe indicated to him. A red harbor buoy bobbed nearby. "I'm not going inside that marker," announced the pilot flatly, slowing to a halt. "Where is the Napoli from here, Joe?" Tony asked. "Just the other side of the red buoy, I'm afraid." Around the police craft, the water was clear and bluish-green. Its surface was broken and dancing slightly from the effect of the waves outside the harbor. By leaning forward, the boys and Chief Colleague made out a long white shape on the bottom. "My boat! Can we get her up, Sergeant?" Tony questioned anxiously. The second policeman assigned to the cruiser had been estimating their chances. "If we can get her to the surface, we can tow her in. The question is, can we get her to the surface? Looks pretty deep here to me. How are we going to put a line on her?" Regretfully, the chief agreed. "You're right. We'll have to go back for a skin diver." Here Joe broke in with a suggestion. "If I go down and attach a line, can you raise her with the winch?" "But we haven't any diving equipment," protested the sergeant. Not even a face mask. Faces were made before face masks, Joe observed, grinning. Already he had kicked off his shoes. Now he was pulling his shirt over his head, revealing his tan, lithe body. Got your line ready? You Hardys sure won't give up, Chief Colling nodded. Okay, try it. The sergeant readied the salvage equipment. He extended the boom of his winch, then handed Joe a steel cable with a heavy steel hook at the end. The boy was now stripped to a pair of white shorts. I'm ready. I figure it's about 12 feet down, the sergeant told him gravely. There'll be some pressure. And look out for the toe, Tony cautioned. Joe accepted the cable. I've done a lot of skin diving and had experience with both, he assured them. Any special place I should attach this? Loop it around something solid on the Napoli, then snap the hook around the cable like this. The sergeant replied, demonstrating. Right. With the cable in one hand, Joe climbed to the rail of the launch. There he balanced for a moment as he took a series of tremendous deep breaths. Then he plunged into the water. Those on board the launch watched anxiously while the pilot tried to hold the boat steady. Joe soon became an indistinct blur against the sunken white craft. Once submerged, Joe drove himself forward with powerful kicks. He kept his hands free for the cable. He began to feel the increasing pressure, mostly on his temples and chest. Joe penetrated deeper. Finally, he could touch the Napoli. Now he felt around it for a place to attach the cable. He moved forward and explored the front seat. There was no likely place. The steering wheel might rip out. Joe felt a pounding in his ears, and he began to yearn for a breath of air. Still, he groped around, feeling for something solid under the dashboard of the craft. At this point, Joe was directly under the steering wheel, the cable beneath his body. As he rolled over on his back to investigate the under part of the dashboard, the cable wound around his body. Suddenly and painfully, the cable had tightened against his flesh. The hook that dangled from a length of cable in Joe's hand had caught around a slat of the floorboards. Joe yanked at the hook, but was unable to loosen it. He thrashed to release himself from the cable, but he was bound fast under the steering wheel, 12 feet below the water surface. Okay, so I'm going to end there for the time being. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed Chapter 8 of The Hardy Boys. And yeah, I think I'm going to be doing a lot more live streams rather than attaching it separately. So anyway, I will see you on the next stream. Have a great day.